Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Loading Screen, a podcast about games, game development, and my game development journey. This is episode 5. If we haven't met, my name is Aaron. I run Eventide Game Studios. I've been a hobby solo game dev for about 4 years now. I have made one game on Steam, and that is A Bridge, which is a Sokoban style puzzle game. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about a phrase called "give me problems and not solutions." And this is mainly revolves around feedback and QA. Then we're going to talk about some podcast highlights, some personal updates, some games I've been playing, and also going to apply some of the topics that we talk about, specifically the feedback and understanding problems part. Then we're going to get into some game dev updates. So what does give me problems and not solution means? To me, it does encompass a lot of different topics, but it's mainly revolved around QA or quality assurance, play testing, and also feedback. But when I say feedback, I don't mean just any feedback. I specifically am referring to the feedback of your experience, but not only just all of your experience. I want to know about the negative points of your experience, because I'm more interested in listening and understanding your problems and when you have them than what you think needs to be done to solve them. And there's a little bit of human psychology, I think, tied to this, in the sense that there's probably some phrase for it, but essentially losses feel worse than wins feel better. So to give you an example, if you compare the experience of losing $5 compared to winning 10, the losing $5 is going to feel worse than winning the $10. And this is how I think about problems in my game, is fixing a problem, to me, will have a much bigger impact on the experience than actually making or doing a solution to make something better. And the way I think about this is, if I have a game with just say like a lot of bugs, but it has like a ton of content, versus a smaller game that works as intended, but has little content, to me, you're going to have a much better experience with the game that actually runs or is operational than the game with all the bugs and that level of content. Because when it comes down to it, no matter how much content a game has, it's not going to matter if you can't actually play the game. So problems are actually going to vary in size. They could be very big, glaring issues like the game doesn't work. You don't know where to go. You don't know how to play. You don't know what you should think about, what you should prioritize. Then it could be even very small, nuanced issues to, I don't know what this item does. Or it'd be nice to have this better feedback, say like when you hit an enemy or when you use an item. So as game developers though, I as the game developer and the game designer, look through the game through, I'll say a different lens or through like different frames of, I'm looking at through the game's internals, the game engine and its design. And I'm aware of the experience, but that's not the primary thing like I'm associating with, because I'm indirectly designing the rules as the designer and essentially the developer. So in other words, I have a whole picture of what the game is, what I'm actually showing to the player and how everything works in between. However, players don't see it that way. They only see what you present to them. So it's possible that they see something that you didn't because of this lens and this framing difference. Another reason why I'm more interested in problems than solutions is because problems to me are more actionable than a solution. Because to be honest, I think players maybe not understand the whole picture, so it might be literally impossible to design a solution, or it could destroy other parts of design that they just don't know about yet, or it just doesn't align with your vision, which is okay. Like a common thing I always think about is when you're talking about like traveling and navigation in games versus like you actually having to like walk to a location versus just fast traveling there. Like those are very big differences that they're going to give you a much different experience. That's the same thing with like crafting versus exploring, like having limited inventories, when you have puzzles, do you have hints? Like that's going to change the experience a lot with them. Difficulty settings are another big one because, players are just going to have different experiences of like, oh, hey, this enemy is too hard at this setting, but it's too easy at this one. The other thing about understanding the problem is it gives me agency as a developer to understand, okay, I understand this problem, so let me address it. Or it gives me agency in the way that I think it needs to be addressed to resolve it. Another part I think is not talked about enough is there's also a social aspect of it, in that when you talk about the negative aspects of a game or the negative aspects of your experience, this typically doesn't sound or feel good to give or to present. It makes you feel like a downer a little bit. I think the reason why I'm more interested in problems than solutions is because I think people don't usually hear that phrase in that way because most people want to hear about solutions. They don't want to hear about problems. They want to, how did you fix it? And then move on. I think game design is one of those rare instances where this actually doesn't apply. Now that we have that all summarized, how do you get to this level of feedback to actually understand the negative aspects and negative pain points of a player's experience? This is challenging to really understand. I think it's for 3 reasons. 1, I'm going to call gameplay. 2 is consciousness/alertness. And then 3 is context. So starting with the first one. It's challenging because it's possible that players could play the same game but have different experiences. So like if you're playing a roguelike, it could be that they just get a bad seed or a succession of bad seeds, or another player can get a succession of quote unquote good seeds. So you kind of have to average it out kind of. There's also maybe the element of just say like RPG, like randomness in RPGs of like, even though a story might be linear, you might traverse the world at a different pace. You might find a secret item that another player didn't. Like all that information was in the game and in the same space, but players navigated through it differently. The other thing or another aspect of this is with skill and difficulty. One thing might be easy for a player and might be hard for another player. So that's why I guess it's challenging to understand the negative points because they are somewhat subjective to the player. So on to the second point of consciousness and alertness is I don't think players really think about their experience while they're playing the game. However, they do feel it. And I think it's also difficult to recognize and articulate what they're feeling, but also like what makes them feel that way. While you're playing the game, you're just playing it for what it is and you're experiencing what it has to offer. You're not really looking at it from the lens of how do I make this game better? So that's consciousness. And the last one is context. As players come in with different backgrounds, different motivations for playing your game, different skill levels, and different expectations. So this shapes their view of when they go to play your game of how they will see it despite what the game is. And players, for instance, might be more critical of bugs. They've had bad experiences with that, so they just don't touch that. Some of them need other game features. Some might be wanting more accessibility settings. Like it's just going to vary. So that context is what makes it, I think, challenging. Are these 3 things is what makes it very challenging to get this level of feedback and for it to be quote unquote accurate. So I understand these are not easy to solve, but I'm going to give my thoughts and attempts to answer them. So for gameplay, this is why essentially you do play testing and you do QA. You want to do it as much as you possibly can because bad runs are going to happen in games, but also good runs are going to happen. So you just want to make sure that I'll say average experience is where you want it to be. I think the best way to do this is to just simply apply the scientific method of have an hypothesis, have players play it, collect data, then gauge the average experience. And if you say, oh, hey, this card or this ability is being used a lot more, then okay, maybe we need to tweak that, or maybe we need to buff something else. So you just need to kind of iterate through that process. So the next is, for consciousness and alertness, this is challenging because I don't think players, they do to a certain degree think of, how do I make it better? And sometimes it's just difficult to gauge. But as far as the actual experience goes, you almost need to be like a game dev therapist and go like, okay, how does this make me feel in this point in the game? Because in the moment, there's going to be a lot going down. I think the key here is to really just slow down, think about why you are doing things, and connect the dots to those feelings and actions. Really slowing down to say, why am I doing this? If I'm playing a game like Hades, like, why did I dash away from the enemy versus just attack them to kill them? Or in Slay the Spire, like, why did I play those cards in that order? Why did I choose to play a potion now versus later? Understanding what it's going to get me. And I think one way I've thought about portraying this or visualizing this is think about it in terms of inputs and outputs. Of inputs are my actions and the outputs are feelings. Of when I use this item, does it make me feel good? Do I enjoy using it? Does it feel underwhelming? Does it feel meh? And also understanding the context of which you're doing the action too. So like, for instance, say you're playing like Dark Souls, using a health potion in battle when you're on like the brink of death. That has so much more value to it than when you're just navigating the world. And also understanding, did the action I do meet my expectation of what I expected to do? I think how I would try to gauge or try to resolve this consciousness and alertness aspect of it. And lastly, for context, I think this could best be resolved of just having good communication, giving them feedback and information up front of what to expect, and then let them decide if they want to move on. Because players do expect a certain level of quality when they play a game. They're going to know if it's like quote unquote an asset flip, or it's maybe made by an indie dev, it's like a prototype tech demo, or if it is actually a full functioning game. Genres are a good way or good indicators of this. For instance, if you have a Souls-like versus a cozy game, like Souls games are going to have a very high skill ceiling, maybe some fast and quick reaction, whereas a cozy game is much slower paced, has a bit of exploration, maybe a little bit of collecting, a small like social aspect to it. That's one part of it. And then not all players will play your game, and that's fine. It just might not be for them. Those are my, I'll say, 3 answers to that. There is one other scenario that I want to cover. It's possible you get feedback about the negative pain points of someone's experience and it doesn't align with your vision. Maybe that is intended. And this is also challenging because you want players to be happy with your game, but you also want to be able to try to be unique and different. And to be honest, I think this happens all the time with games because people have preferences and opinions. Like I always think of like, you should have X feature because Y game has it. And I actually had this pop up with my game of Bridge. The Z key in Sokobans, like Baba's U, is typically undo, but in my game, Z is a designated key for moving down and to the left, and I put U as the undo button. And players had a very hard time trying to wrap their head around it or not understanding why at the beginning, because you unlock the diagonal pieces that actually use the Z key later when you're playing the game. So it's a bit of a learning curve and a mental shift for players to make that change when they're so used to the genre or this style of game having a specific behavior. And that might be on me as the dev that I didn't pick up on that, but it was also me solving a problem in a different way. If that ever happens to you, like that's fine. Acknowledge it, think about it, and you as the game dev and game designer are ultimately the decider of how you want your game to play and feel and the experience you want players to have. I guess maybe to reiterate, like you don't need to apply all the feedback you get. Like there are going to be outliers here and there. And, players might not even have the information. Hey, you might not even have all the information of what the player is talking about. But I think the key is really just start the conversation, because I think players definitely like hearing from devs, like what they're thinking behind the scenes. Because I've definitely heard of scenarios where like they think, X might be the issue, but it's really Y. And I remember reading the story in Reddit one time where there was an executive or someone higher up playing the game, and they said this was a racing game they were play testing, and they said the game needed the cars to have more chrome. And that's really odd and very specific feedback of why do the cars need chrome. And he mentioned kind of going a layer deeper of like, why do you think they need chrome? And the problem was he didn't feel like the cars were fast. If you have an exotic car and it just feels like it's moseying along like any other standard sedan, like it doesn't make it feel special. So what the devs did is basically they changed the camera angle to be a bit more reactive to the speed. So it would zoom out when you're going really fast, maybe have some anime lines. I don't remember if they actually had the anime lines, but when you did this, you could actually feel the speed, and that actually gave the experience of the car feeling fast. And you didn't even need to really edit anything in terms of like adding the actual chrome. So situations are gonna pop up like this. To kind of wrap up all of this into a nice little bundle. I think you definitely should share the negative aspects of your experience. You can share your problems and be able to articulate these pain points, because you're going to have, some gameplay differences. You're going to have different problems with being consciousness and alert while you're playing. But then also you're going to be coming in with contextual backgrounds that are just going to be different. And I think you just need to kind of slow down when you play your game, try to get data to mitigate these gameplay issues. Like I said, slow down when you're playing to really understand does it give the experience that I expect? And then just being upfront and being very communicative with your players and your audience of like, this is the game that is present, and go from there. And I think ultimately, if you kind of consolidate this, I think this will make you much better identifying issues, not only in your own games, but also other games when you start to play them. And it itself is a skill, like game design or game development or programming or art. You're going to get better at it with time. But I think also understanding that when you do recognize these pain points, knowing how to give and receive this feedback will not only pay you dividends in game development, but I think it flourishes outside of game development and really a lot of aspects of life. That's my main topic for today. We can go into some podcast highlights. So first, I'm going to mention we got our first new subscriber on YouTube since we're starting the podcast. So that was definitely exciting to see or get the notification for. The podcast is doing better. Right now I have it posted on YouTube and Libsyn. YouTube doing a lot better. I think that's mainly just because of the discovery aspect of it. We're getting views. We got a few likes and got a few comments on episode 4. That was very exciting to see and feel. For some personal updates, I did get my new gaming ergonomic keyboard, and right now, I'm looking at it right now, it's fabulous. It's a Cloud9 C989 Ergo FSK, and it has Kali brown keys. They feel pretty good, I would say. They're definitely softer than I imagined compared to the Logitech, maybe cherry brown keys, I think. They're a little more clicky and louder than I was imagining too, which is one reason why I don't like blues. Cherry makes blues, that is. It is all RGB'd out. There's actually a software utility you can download. You can customize it. There's like a bunch of macros and shortcuts on the left-hand side. It's got like a directional keypad, maybe, and some other shortcuts like the home, delete, end key, and as well as a number pad. It actually splits in the middle too, which is really cool. Haven't had a split keyboard before. It's magnetic, so you can actually kind of bring it together and it'll stay together. And then right where it splits, there's like this very large volume button, which is, I always miss that from my previous keyboards I've gotten. I would say I'm still getting used to the split because I'm definitely not used to that. It helps my wrist though. One downside is that because it is so large on the right side, I feel like I have to stretch and reach for my mouse. So I'm curious if there's, a way to have a shorter one. And when I bought this one, I didn't realize they had a arrow key and keypad one. I might consider that in the future, but I would say I definitely miss the arrow keys. But the number pad, I'm kind of 50-50 on if I want to keep it or not. Right now, good experience. I'm going to kind of play around with it a bit more. Wrists definitely feel a lot better playing with it. I think it's a combination of the split and just getting the right level and height of it. I bought some new straps. Definitely taking rests, I think, helps. I think probably the most. Then other personal updates. The Olympics are happening right now. I would say a big sports fan, or I watch it every now and then. And the Olympics being on is, I think, fun to watch and keep up with. Seeing the highlights, because I'm obviously in the U.S. and the Olympics right now are in France. I don't get to watch it live, but seeing the highlights, seen mostly on Reddit, it has been fun to see or keep up with. I like watching the track and field and the gymnastics and swimming. I did miss the rugby earlier because I forgot when the Olympics started. But other than that, nothing really too exciting. Just doing chores, clean up the house, that kind of a thing. Then moving on to maybe some games I've played. I've played 4 games this week. The first is Slay the Spire. I played it for about an hour across 2 different sessions. Slay the Spire is like one of those games I have like a mixed relationship with of like, I love aspects of the game and I think it's a lot of fun, but it's definitely difficult to understand the synergies. And like, it's mainly the advice I've found on Reddit is you want to be able to get cards that solve the problems that you have next. The problem is I don't know what those problems are and what my deck needs to be able to win more. And I don't know if it's more of an experiential thing or I essentially just need to keep playing it to get the right idea and the right synergies. But I think I have too long of a gap between playing it to really try to build those synergies back up. I've watched videos and things like that. And like the tier lists, I think that people have are definitely good insights to understand like what cards to maybe pick, but also why they pick them in the context they are picking them. I think matters a lot. Slay the Spire is one. Tunic, I've been playing. I played it for about an hour, trying to essentially try to progress in the game. I didn't get anywhere. I'm totally stuck right now. So it's a bit frustrating to play a game and not feel like you're making any progress. I might get back into that and maybe look up a little bit of maybe a hint or so. I have a general idea where I need to go or what I need to look at, but I think it's really just sitting down and trying to connect the dots, like I was saying earlier. I did play a little bit of Balatro on my Switch, and I did beat the orange stake on the yellow deck. So the orange stake is that you have jokers that could be perishable, which basically means there's a chance that it has this ability called perishable, and they have essentially a timer on them of 5 rounds. And after 5 rounds, they become debuffed. So basically, they just can't be used like at all. And the way I was able to get past this is I got money build working, and I paired it along with stone cards and a pair. Like the jokers I had are a burnt joker, stone joker, bootstraps, which I got late, which was like a totally clutch move. It just came at the right time and I took it. Fortune teller, and the card that started it all was the duo, which basically gives you 2x when you play a pair. I think the way I got the money build to work is because I got the shop vouchers pretty early that just liquidate. Well, there's one before liquidation, because there actually is a voucher called liquidation, but it essentially reduces the cost of everything in the shop lower and lower. So because I'm earning so much when I'm actually playing, and that I just get so much money, I don't spend all of it. So I'm basically net up every single round, that I just got a good economy. So when bootstraps came along, it was giving me much more than at the time was abstract joker. So one kind of downside was, so the anti-A boss was Verdant Leaf. So Verdant Leaf is essentially all your cards are debuffed until you sell a joker. Unfortunately, since Burnt Joker isn't a scoring joker, I had to sell it so that I could actually quote unquote win, which I did end up winning. But the reason that's sad is because it doesn't get the little sticker that says like, I beat this on orange stake. I guess I just got to go back and play it on orange stake at some point. I did unlock the final difficulty of gold, and that gives the jokers a chance to spawn with a rental sticker. And that rental sticker basically means that it costs $3 to use that joker per round. So if you don't have a good economy, good luck. But honestly, I'm excited for the challenge that comes along with that. And lastly, the game I've been playing it's called Aotenjo. And it's being, I'll say, marketed similar to a Balatro and Mahjong game. This game, I want to deep dive into more about its designs and apply all the feedback that I had been talking about earlier. So first, I want to talk about some of my experience with Mahjong. I'm not used to playing Mahjong in the sense of, I think there actually is a game called Mahjong, but I'm used to the computer game that is more of like a matching style game. And I'm going to probably date myself a little bit, but it came like, free on a computer. You actually had to buy a CD and put it in, and then you would play the game. This is probably back in the 2000s. So that's the Mahjong I'm used to playing. So when I heard Mahjong, that was the first thing I thought of, which I didn't understand why that would click with Balatro, but I realized it was the actual Mahjong, which I don't know how to differentiate the two. But anyway, so when I refer to Mahjong, I'm referring to that actual one and not the matching style. So the concept of the game is that you play hands and you get points. I think what's different is that you have to play the tiles, which are like the cards, in a group of 3 or 4 in one, and then another group that is a pair. And the group that has 3 or 4 could be in an ascension, meaning I have to ascend in rank or in value, or they could be 3 of a kind. And the pair always has to be a pair. And similar to Balatro, each tile has points associated with it. So like a 4 rank tile gives you 4 points. The points are called Fu, and the molt, so to speak, is called Fan. So you start to play, you play these groups and this pair. You have 4 turns essentially to beat the target score. If you beat the target score, then you move on to the next round. But while you're playing, so you play the hand, it does its scoring, which is, I think as one would expect. But I think the interesting thing is that when you score, you have to do the same thing the next round. However, the 3 or 4 group that you played in the previous group is also included in this scoring, but also the next scoring. And essentially, if you can get a good hand early, it will pay dividends later. The other side effect is that you're going to be discarding a lot. So you have like 136 tiles to play around with, and your hand size is quite large. It's maybe like 10 to 15. I guess get an exact count, but it's quite big. So you're discarding to try to find the tiles you need. So when they score, because I'm going to talk about this later, but you learn how to score better as you go along. Some hands are much more elaborate and rely on the previous hands that you played and not just the current ones. And the higher and more difficult hands you play, obviously the more points you get. Then it goes with more of the Slay the Spire approach, in the sense that it treats like relics as Balatro jokers. You're limited to 5, and you can enhance cards to give them just abilities and buffs, so to speak, similar to Balatro. So that's the game, if that makes any sense. So far, I've played 4 rounds. I played 2 when it came out, then I uninstalled it, and then when I was doing the research for this, I played 2 more. The last run I did play, I did win, so I actually got to see the end all the way through. So that's kind of my prior history. Now I want to go into the problems that I foresee and the kind of the negative pain points of my experience. So first off, there's definitely a knowledge gap because I'm not used to Mahjong. So a lot of the verbiage they use in the game and how it relates to Mahjong is sometimes a bit unclear. So, I mean, there's some easy ones, like you have dots, bamboos, characters. Then you get into some like medium level style verbiage of like there's ones that are dragon tiles and there's ones that are wind tiles. But then you get to other words like pung, chow, honor, and simple. And these are rather general terms they use to consolidate different combinations of dots, bamboos, characters. I might be getting that wrong. But because of that, it's very hard to keep my train of thought with what hands are going to be scoring and when. So I definitely think that aspect will probably click better with Eastern audiences who are very much used to those terms and better than Western audiences, which is where I'm coming from. So yeah, because it uses a lot of keywords and they're kind of difficult to understand. It does assume a little bit. I mean, luckily it has tooltips to try to explain it, but sometimes it just doesn't click when I'm reading it. I have to read it like 3 or 4 times as I'm going through it to be like, kind of get the very general sense. And sometimes I just might even ignore it and just keep playing to see maybe I'll figure it out with time. One thing I found out after playing all my 4 rounds was that there's a tile assist option that is disabled by default. And I definitely think this should be enabled because otherwise when you hover over a tile, it tells you, what it is. Obviously there's a visual representation of it of like, this is dots, this is bamboo. Like those are pretty easy to see. But you have to count the number of bamboos and the number of dots. And this tile assist option basically just puts a number on the upper right hand corner of like, this is a 4. And that's really helpful for just noticing them at a glance, especially with the character tiles, that they are not easily readable to figure out what actually number it is. I think it's like, for the characters, it's like 4 to 9. Like obviously they're unique characters, but at a glance, it's very hard to see that. But if I would have known that this feature was there earlier, I think it would have saved me so much time than needing to hover over every single tile to see, is this the one I need? If not, discard or whatever. Another bit of feedback is that there's a lot of tiles. Starting out with like 136 tiles in your wall, which is your wall is like your collection of tiles, or you can think of it as like your deck of, it's just very unreliable to get the ones that you need. Because like if I started up Slay the Spire or started up Balatro and you said, here's a deck of 136 cards, like that is just so overwhelming. I don't know how to really solve that, but it feels too much, like too much. And because of that, you're going to be discarding cards a lot. Discarding tiles a lot. It gives you some to start out with. It gives you like 5 or 8. And considering the amount of tiles you get, like that obviously adds the element of randomness to it. But it's just a lot to sift through. There are ways to get more. Like if you skip a hand, essentially would benefit you with more discards. The downside to that, which I'll talk about the scoring later, you're kind of just battling getting the right ones. Kind of a side note about discarding is that it also has the option to right click or have, I'll say like a discard mode. The right click feels so much more fluid to say like, okay, get rid of this one, get rid of this one, get rid of this one. Because when you have like the tiles you're looking for, like you just want to be able to get rid of them, or discard them as you wish. But the way they have it set up right now by default is that you have to go into this discard mode, select the tiles you want to discard, then jump back into playing mode. And the tiles are highlighted red to like let you know, hey, you're in discard mode. So if you click it, like this is going to be gone. However, I think it just adds more friction to really what you're trying to get after. And this right click definitely speeds that up. One aspect is that sometimes you get to a point where it's just like, it's unplayable because like I said, you have to play the hands in a group of 3 to 4 and then a pair. So there's definitely the option to where you don't satisfy the 3 or 4 or you don't have a pair. So essentially you just have to like skip the round. But if you're out of hands, you skip and you lose. And that's it. So that's not a great aspect or not a great sense of design, in my opinion. So then that's, I would say, some of the feedback I have for inside the game. Outside of the game, the post-game decisions that you make are presented in basically just like a lot of text. It gives you more of like a this or that option, and then it kind of lists it. There's options to like pick up gadgets, which are similar to like potions and consumable cards in Slay the Spire and Balatro, respectively. You have to kind of hover over them. It gives you the chance to like upgrade your upgrade your tiles. You can buy more. Every now and then it does give you like a free option, which I thought was interesting, but it doesn't give you a lot of freedom to kind of see where you're progressing. So going back to when you're playing, I didn't recognize this the first time I played it, but there was a point where I was playing and I didn't know how many actually hands I had, and I kept playing hands and then I just lost. So I think it needs to be more indicative or tell you better of what hand you're on. There's like literally like these just 4 dots in the bottom middle of your screen, and those are the hands. And if you lose those, you essentially lose the run. And I think there could be a better option to display that information than going more, I think, deeper into the scoring. Like the scoring hands, I think, are relatively simple to understand. Of like you just play an ascending hand. In that group of 3, you play a 3 of a kind. Like that's easy to understand. It gets more complicated when you start to realize that you need to play specific hands first to have better hands later. And one thing I think is very hard to understand is that it doesn't list out all the hands when you first start playing. Maybe this is a discovery thing as you're playing the game, but it has like secret hands. But I think the part I don't know if it actually applies is it actually reduces your scoring because you haven't unlocked these hands yet, which obviously is going to reduce your score. So you don't know to maybe strive for like a certain type of build. I think that's kind of interesting. The bosses can be relatively brutal if you're not prepared for them. The 2 I remember off the top of my head were, there's one that corrupts your tiles. So basically it reduces your multiplier by some set amount. I think it's like -6. So if you don't have a lot of mold going, like that can very easily destroy your run. And then the other one is that your target score is like set to a certain amount when you first start the round, but then if you discard, it will actually increase the target score every single time you discard by a set percentage amount. So essentially this becomes exponential because as you discard, say it's like 5%, okay, it goes up 5%, but then now I'm taking the 5% of that new value. So it's just going to keep going up and up and up. So you have to be reliant on getting the tiles you need essentially the first go, or you have to recognize the consequences of discarding. So that, if you're not prepared, can be quite detrimental. Then it's hard to have a sense of progression in the game as well. I actually didn't know how far I was into the game, how many rounds or sets of 3, because it follows the Balatro style of you have like 2 small hands and then you have more of like a boss blind kind of a thing, which is where the boss abilities, I guess, come into play. I actually didn't know how far I was into the game, when it was going to end. There is an endless, or I think timeless version it calls it, but I didn't play that. There's that sense of progression, but there's also, other than like the score going up and like you seeing your money and you upgrading your tiles, like it's very hard to get a sense of the quality of all of the tiles and what you're looking for. And unless you have your relic like things you want obviously your tiles to amplify those and vice versa. That's one aspect. And then it's difficult for me to understand the difference between like the enhancements versus the additions. So in Balatro, you have additions, which are like innate to the card, of they give it essentially like a power up. It could be like a some amount of chips, a molt. It could be negative, which gives the hand it goes in a extra slot, or it could be like a multiplicative molt, which is like one of the more powerful abilities. And then there's the enhancements, which are also innate to the card, but they could be modified. Is it more of a better way to put it? So you can add chips, but you can make it like wild. And this doesn't affect the addition. whereas the enhancements can be applied to a card over and over again if you wanted. So knowing which of these applies to it doesn't really tell you what you can and cannot do. At least it wasn't clear when I first started. The music and the sound effects are, I'll say, applicable to the game and what is happening, but they are a little bit underwhelming. It's just the same sound effect over and over and over, so it gets rather repetitive over time. The music volume was like way too loud when I first started the game, and that I had to like tone down to like 25%. And the visual feedback of the high hands that you play, obviously, or high hands that give you a really high score, it doesn't quite hit as well. I think one reason is that it does have the speeding up sound effect of the tile essentially triggering all its effects and that speeding up over time. I think that is definitely something that makes it more satisfying because it has like this, it ramps up, kind of like when in music, like the beat's going to drop, like it has this build up to it. But I think the visual feedback is rather lacking other than seeing the tiles trigger over and over and over. It does have this colored bar that I think is supposed to act like Balatro's like fire. When in Balatro, if you have a really high hand, the fire starts to like grow from the score, and then the bigger your score relative to the target score that you're after, the fire will just get bigger and bigger, and it just is like very satisfying. And I remember watching this video about Balatro's fire, and they said like tickles your brain in all the right ways, and it's like that. I think encapsulates what like I'm after in the visual feedback. And this just has this colored bar that goes from left to right and just fills up with different colors, I think, rapidly, but it doesn't have the same impact. Those are kind of my negative pain points. So I think these are definitely things to step towards and maybe things to improve in the game. The game design, I think, is still interesting because of the unique, I'll say, scoring extension that it has of like the previous hands affect the current hands, but also obviously your next hands. So being able to build these longer, more elaborate hands is definitely unique. It's definitely going to be hard to, I'll say, to maintain and try to replicate. Run to run or turn to turn or round to round, I guess is probably the best way to put it. It does have aspects of like the shop, in which I think is pretty standard to, improve your deck as you go. I think there's a lot going on with it. I want to probably end it there in terms of my feedback and the games I've been playing with that. Then, as far as a game dev update goes, I would say I'm definitely back into it. It took me a few days to get into the groove. Let's say like last Monday, and by like Wednesday and like 2 days ago as of recording this, which is like probably Friday, it finally clicked with me again, and I'm having like a super fun time with it. And the problem I've been trying to solve is the problem of opponents in my game, because my game is based on war. You need to play against somebody, and that's fine. I play a card, you play a card, because of the way war works. High card wins. So then you go, I win, you win. All fine and dandy. But when you combine it with kind of the Balatro aspect that I'm going after, of I will need to be able to upgrade my cards and have like a Joker-like card that will help me win as I go. So as I get stronger, that's not going to make sense if I get stronger but my opponent doesn't. So I need to make a way for the opponent to get strong as well, because otherwise, it would just feel really weird and it'd make it honestly too easy. So now I'm left to the problem of how do I build an essentially opponent that scales the player so that it feels challenging, but also be balanced enough so that it still is exciting for them to play. And from right now, a big part of solving this problem is what cards do I give this opponent? And I really struggled with this for, I could say, quite a bit of time. I had a general idea of what I wanted I have a collection of all these random kind of themed cards I have it gives just certain abilities when certain things happen. And I've been just collecting all of these card ideas like I've been talking about in the past couple weeks, and essentially just taking certain cards out of that and then bundling them together based off of like a certain, I call it like theme around it. So like one of them is like card rank, which is one of the opponents I'm calling like math teacher. Like they deal with the number of the cards. When a certain sequence of numbers or the card has a certain rank, it will trigger this ability. And they're very, very simple. But I think what the mental shift I had is I had been designing all these cards and then try to have the opponents have parts of this pool of cards, so to speak. And it just felt really random in a sense. So it dawned on me that maybe I should flip it. Instead of having the cards fit the opponents, I have the opponents fit the cards. So they would get their own personal cards. And then, through time, you might get some of the access to some of these cards. And to me, that feels a lot more ubiquitous and allows for much better theming and allows the opponents to have a much better sense of character and personality to them. And because of this, it's constrained how I think about the opponents and actually giving me more ideas for cards to add. So because of this, I built this opponent system. And it's basically made up of two subsystems. One, it imports data about the opponent. So who's the opponent? Are they playable right now? I haven't added, but what deck they're going to use or what style of deck. Maybe a quick description when you go to select them in the selection menu that I have set up. So that's one part of it. And the other part is the pool of cards they have access to. And I sorted them by rarity. And right now, I got it working and it's playable. And this is what I'm going to run with right now of how I'm solving this problem. Because now it's completely configurable and customizable of if I need to add a new card with a new ability, I simply go to my pool of cards, add certain names or their abilities of the cards I want this opponent to have. And then all of a sudden they have access to them. The opponent right now is that I have a math teacher who deals with ranks of the cards and the numbers. It definitely feels too easy. They definitely feel, I'll say, underpowered. So that's going to be a game design problem as I go too. There's other game design issues. One of them right now is the game feels slow and a little bit sloggy. And this is mainly due to a limitation in the design of you can only earn so much score per turn. And when you have a target score of 25,000, so let's say, but you only earn 1,000 points a turn, it's going to take you 25 turns. And considering if you're going to scale faster than the, this opponent that I've designed, then it's I know I'm going to win. It's just trying to go through the motions essentially to get to that score so I can move on to it. And hopefully the opponent will scale faster as time goes, or I earn and buff my deck to get cards that get me higher score later on the road. Just things like that. One thing I thought was interesting when I was playtesting this, there were parts and times where I forgot I was playtesting it and ended up just playing runs, which I think is a good aspect. That is a good. There's some of it that is mesmerizing. It has this sort of magic to it that I want to keep playing it to see what happens. And there were a few runs that okay, I tested the thing already, but let me just finish this run and I'll get back to whatever I was doing. Some of the runs end in a couple minutes, and I think the run I won lasted me 16 minutes. So it's a relatively short game right now, and maybe that'll get longer with time. That's kind of the main thing with playtesting and the opponents. Kind of one other side thing I did is I've been testing the shop mechanic. So I upgraded that to be more, I'll say, card specific. So I have a card that will upgrade your hand. I guess not the hand, more of the outcome of the hand. And I have these specialty cards, which are the cards I've been talking about with all these mechanics that give you better score, making them be more, I'll say random, but appear in the shop, I think more appropriately. And I made it so that it would show up by rarity. So the likelihood that you get a really rare card less often be, I guess, more fitting, where you get a common card more, stuff like that. But when I was playtesting the shop in one of the runs that I forgot I was playtesting it, I got this really crazy run where I got three legendary cards. So legendary is the highest out of the 5 rarities that I have. Right now I have a 2% drop rate for a legendary card, and the fact that I got 3 legendaries in this run, which is a 1 in 125,000, was mind blowing to me that even happened. So yeah, that's my game dev update for this week. I just want to say thank you for listening. If you want to hear more about kind of the latest news and what I've been doing, feel free to join our email list. If you want to continue the conversation we've been talking about of maybe some negative pain points you've experienced in some of the games you've been playing, or even some ones that you found on your own that you're looking to keep working on and developing, hop over to Discord and let's talk about it. I'm all for talking about game design and, helping you make games better. Also, check out A Bridge on Steam. Any links that I have for games I played or any other notes, check out the show notes, and those will be there. So I just want to say thank you again, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.